My name is Campbell and I'm 35 years old. I stood in the corner of my brother George's engagement party watching my parents beam with pride. When they raised their glasses, my father's voice boomed. "We're so proud of George. He's the son every parent dreams of." Then my Aunt Melanie smirked, looked directly at me, and added, "Maybe one day you'll stop being such a disappointment, Campbell." The room erupted in awkward laughter as they toasted him. I smiled, stayed silent, and slipped out early. This morning my cousin texted me, "You won't believe the scene your parents caused after you left." Before I continue this story, hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Where are you watching from today? I grew up in an upscale suburb just outside Boston, where pristine lawns and colonial-style homes projected an image of perfect families living perfect lives. My father, Richard, built his reputation as one of the most successful attorneys in Massachusetts, known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue in the courtroom. My mother, Eleanor, transformed her eye for design into a thriving interior decorating business, catering exclusively to the wealthiest families in New England. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family, successful parents, 2 healthy sons, and a house that could have been featured in Architectural Digest. But inside those immaculate walls, a different story unfolded. My brother George, 3 years younger than me, somehow became the center of our family universe from the moment he was born. Where I was thoughtful and introspective, George was outgoing and charismatic. While I spent hours in my room learning about photography and light composition, George dominated the football field, bringing home trophies that my father proudly displayed in our living room. My interests were labeled hobbies, while George's pursuits were achievements. The pattern established itself early. When I was 12, I saved for months to buy a used camera, teaching myself photography through library books and trial and error. 3 months later, the camera broke. A devastating loss for a kid who had found his passion. That same week, George mentioned wanting to try lacrosse. By the weekend, he had a complete set of brand new equipment. When I asked my parents about replacing my camera, my father looked up from his newspaper long enough to say, "Maybe you should find a hobby that doesn't break the bank." The disparity continued throughout high school. My senior year, I had my first photography exhibition at a local community center. My mother promised they would attend, but called last minute to say they couldn't make it. George had an unexpected football scrimmage. They didn't even ask to see the photos later. Meanwhile, they never missed a single one of George's games, even rearranging business trips to accommodate his schedule. Our family vacations followed the same pattern. If George wanted to go skiing, we went skiing even though I got altitude sickness. If George was interested in deep-sea fishing, we spent days on boats while I fought seasickness. My suggestions for photography trips to national parks were dismissed as boring without discussion. By the time I graduated high school, I had retreated deeply into my creative world, finding solace in capturing moments through my lens that others missed. Photography became my escape and my voice, a way to show people how I saw the world when words failed me. I applied to art schools behind my parents' backs, knowing they expected me to follow my father into law. When the acceptance letter from a prestigious photography program in New York came, my parents' reaction was worse than I anticipated. My father called it a waste of potential, while my mother worried what she would tell her friends. The argument ended with me packing my bags that night. At 22, I moved to New York with 2 suitcases, my camera equipment, and a determination to prove my path was valid. The next decade passed with minimal contact. I called on holidays and birthdays, enduring the inevitable questions about when I would get a real job. Our conversations were superficial, focusing on George's latest accomplishments. His law school graduation, his first big case, his promotion to partner at a prestigious firm. My own journey, the struggles to pay rent while assisting established photographers, my first solo exhibition in a small gallery, the award-winning documentary series I shot in Appalachia, received polite but disinterested acknowledgement. My early career showed promise. My work appeared in several respected photography magazines, and I built a modest reputation in New York's competitive art scene. But the last few years brought setbacks. The gallery representing my work closed during the economic downturn. A documentary project lost funding halfway through. The changing media landscape made it harder to sell editorial work. I found myself taking more commercial jobs, product photography, corporate headshots, just to pay the bills, work that paid but didn't feed my soul. Through these years, my cousin Jessica remained my only real connection to family. 3 years older than me, and equally estranged from the family expectations, she kept me updated on family news without judgment. It was Jessica who called to tell me about George's engagement to Amanda, a pediatric surgeon from a similarly accomplished Boston family. And it was Jessica who convinced me to attend the engagement party. "You don't have to stay long," she insisted during our phone call. "Just make an appearance. I'll be there as your buffer." "They don't want me there, Jess," I argued, staring at the formal invitation that had arrived in my mailbox. "They want the idea of me, the dutiful older brother, showing up to complete the family portrait." "Maybe," she admitted, "but George asked about you specifically. He wants you there." That surprised me. George and I hadn't had a real conversation in years. We exchanged birthday texts and occasional emails, but the close bond we had as very young children had dissolved under the weight of our parents' comparisons. "I don't know, Jess. Look, I know it's hard, but maybe it's time to break the pattern. Show up on your terms. See what happens." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I used some of my commercial photography earnings to buy a decent suit, booked a hotel room in Boston for 2 nights, and prepared myself to re-enter the world I had fled years before. The engagement party was held at the Boston Harbor Hotel in a ballroom overlooking the water. I arrived exactly 30 minutes after the start time, late enough to avoid the awkward initial mingling, but early enough to not be conspicuously absent. The valet took my rental car, giving it a slightly judgmental glance compared to the luxury vehicles ahead of mine. Walking into the venue felt like stepping onto a movie set, one where I was clearly an extra, not a main character. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over round tables draped in cream linens. Elaborate floral arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas towered from each table center. A string quartet played softly in the corner. I estimated at least 100 guests milling about in designer clothes, champagne flutes in hand. My modest but well-tailored navy suit suddenly felt inadequate as I spotted my father across the room in what was undoubtedly a bespoke tuxedo. My mother stood beside him in an elegant silver gown, her blonde hair perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. They were speaking to an older couple I recognized as longtime family friends, my mother laughing gracefully at something being said. Before I could decide whether to approach them first or find the bar, my Aunt Patricia spotted me. "Campbell, my goodness, you actually came." Her voice carried, causing several heads to turn in my direction. She air-kissed both my cheeks, leaving the scent of expensive perfume. "Let me look at you. Still, so thin. Don't they feed artists in New York?" "Good to see you too, Aunt Patricia." I managed, already feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. "Your parents didn't think you'd make it." "Richard, Eleanor," she called out, waving them over. "Look who's here." My parents approached with practiced smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. My mother embraced me stiffly. "Campbell, what a surprise," she said, her eyes quickly scanning my appearance. "You could have used a haircut before coming." My slightly too long hair had always been a point of contention. My father shook my hand firmly. "Son, glad you could fit this into your schedule." The pause spoke volumes about what he thought of my career. "Congratulations on George's engagement," I said, trying to keep things positive. "Yes, Amanda is wonderful. Perfect match for your brother." My mother beamed. "She's finishing her residency at Mass General. Her father is the chief of surgery there." "That's great. I'm happy for them." "And what about you, Campbell? Jessica mentioned you were having some career adjustments." My father's tone made it clear that adjustments was a euphemism for failures. "The industry is changing," I said neutrally. "I'm adapting." "Well, there's always room at the firm if you want something stable," he offered, knowing full well I would never accept. Before I could respond, my mother spotted someone more important. "Oh, the Whitmores just arrived. We should greet them. Campbell, do try to mingle. Your brother will be so pleased you're here." They drifted away as quickly as they had approached, leaving me standing alone. I made my way to the bar, ordering a whiskey neat. Liquid courage seemed necessary for the evening ahead. As I waited for my drink, I observed the room more carefully. Near the entrance, George stood with a beautiful woman I assumed was Amanda. She wore a champagne-colored dress that complemented her warm brown skin, her hair styled in elegant curls. George looked happier than I'd seen him in years, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist as they greeted guests. They make a good-looking couple, don't they? I turned to find a woman about my age standing beside me at the bar. She had the same warm complexion as Amanda, but wore a deep blue dress and had her hair in a sophisticated updo. They do, I agreed. Are you with the bride's side? Good guess. I'm Rachel, Amanda's sister. She extended her hand. And based on the family resemblance and the slightly uncomfortable expression, I'm guessing you're the elusive older brother Campbell. I smiled despite myself. That obvious, huh? Amanda's been curious about you. Apparently George doesn't talk about you much, which made her even more interested. Not much to tell, I said, taking my drink from the bartender. I doubt that. Rachel accepted her own drink, some kind of martini. Amanda found your website, you know. She was impressed. We both were. This caught me by surprise. My photography website. Unless you have another secret career, your Appalachia series was beautiful, raw, and honest. For the first time since arriving, I felt something other than anxiety. Thank you. That project meant a lot to me. It showed. She looked around the room. These kinds of events are a special kind of torture, aren't they? All the social performance. You're not enjoying being the supportive sister. About as much as you're enjoying being the supportive brother. She raised her glass in a small toast to surviving family obligations. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling like I'd found an unexpected ally. Our conversation was interrupted by the announcement that dinner would be served shortly. Rachel excused herself to find her parents, and I consulted the seating chart. To my disappointment, but not surprise, I was placed at a table far from the family with some distant cousins and business associates. As I made my way to my assigned table, I heard my name called. Jessica was hurrying toward me, looking apologetic in a burgundy dress. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, hugging me tightly. Client emergency. Did I miss anything traumatic? Just the usual passive-aggressive welcome, I assured her, genuinely glad to see her. I see they've seated us with Cousin Robert and his incredibly boring wife, Jessica, noted, linking her arm through mine. At least we can suffer together. Dinner was as uncomfortable as expected. The distant relatives at our table asked probing questions about my hobby and whether I had a real job on the side. One elderly great-aunt reminisced about how much potential I had shown as a child, and what a shame it was I hadn't applied myself properly. Jessica deflected what she could occasionally, squeezing my arm under the table in solidarity. From our distant vantage point, I watched my parents at the main table animatedly conversing with Amanda's parents. They looked proud, engaged, and genuinely happy, expressions I couldn't remember being directed at me. George caught my eye across the room and raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. I returned the gesture, wondering what he really thought about my presence here. After the main course was cleared, the soft chime of a knife against crystal signaled the beginning of the toasts. My father stood first, commanding the room with his presence, as he always had in courtrooms and boardrooms. His tall frame straightened to its full height, shoulders squared in his impeccable tuxedo. The room fell silent immediately. For those who don't know me, I'm Richard George's father, he began, his resonant voice carrying without need of a microphone. When my son told me he'd found the woman he wanted to spend his life with, I wasn't surprised. George has always known exactly what he wants and how to achieve it. A murmur of appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd. From the moment George could walk, he showed us the kind of man he would become. Determined, focused, and exceptional in everything he attempted. I still remember his first Little League game, how he stepped up to bat with such confidence. He struck out that day, but came back the next game and hit a home run. My father's voice swelled with pride, his eyes bright with emotion I rarely saw. That's who George is. He doesn't give up. He excels. Through school, through law school, through his career, he has exceeded every expectation we ever had for him. and now, in finding Amanda, he has once again shown his impeccable judgment. My father turned slightly toward George and Amanda, raising his champagne glass higher. Amanda, we are delighted to welcome you to our family. You are brilliant, kind, and clearly have the good sense to recognize what a remarkable man our son is. More appreciative laughter followed. My mother stood to join my father, her hand slipping naturally into his. George has truly been a blessing to us, she added, her voice thick with emotion. He's the son every parent dreams of, accomplished, thoughtful, and with a heart big enough to match his intelligence. The words hit me like physical blows. Every parent dreams of, not some parents, every parent. The exclusion was so casual, so complete, it left no room for interpretation. In their eyes, I was not even part of the equation. To George and Amanda, my father concluded, may your life together be as extraordinary as you both are. To George and Amanda, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. As the applause died down, my Aunt Melanie, my mother's sister and longtime enforcer of family expectations, stood up from her seat near my parents. She hadn't planned to speak. I could tell by my mother's surprised expression. But Melanie had never been one to miss an opportunity to reinforce the family hierarchy. If I could just add something, she said, her voice carrying that particular blend of sweetness and venom I remembered from childhood. George, you've always made this family so proud, unlike some. Her eyes found me across the room, and her lips curved into a smirk. Maybe one day your brother will stop being such a disappointment and follow your example. The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Some guests looked away awkwardly. Others stared directly at me with pitying expressions or barely concealed amusement. Heat rushed to my face, my stomach clenching painfully. Jessica's hand gripped mine under the table so hard her nails dug into my palm. Across the room, George's expression flickered between embarrassment and discomfort. He whispered something to Amanda, whose eyes widened in shock before turning toward me with unmistakable compassion. But neither said anything publicly to counter my aunt's statement. The moment stretched the laughter, continuing a beat too long. I forced my face into a neutral smile, years of practice making it almost convincing. Inside, I was 16 again, standing in our living room as my father lectured me about wasting time with artsy nonsense instead of focusing on debate club like George. I was 22, packing my car as my mother watched silently from the porch, not asking me to stay. I was 35 and still somehow hoping for approval that would never come. "Excuse me," I murmured to Jessica, pulling out my phone. "I need to take this call." There was no call, but it provided the escape I needed. I walked swiftly toward the exit, feeling dozens of eyes following me. The hotel bathroom provided temporary sanctuary. I leaned against the cool marble counter, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. They looked exactly like my father's, the same deep blue that people always complimented him on, one of many ironies. My phone vibrated with a text from Jessica. "You okay? That was horrible. Want me to come find you?" I typed back, "I'm fine. Just need a minute." But as I stood there, the familiar weight of family disappointment settling over me like a heavy coat, I knew I couldn't go back into that room and continue pretending. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. I texted Jessica, going to head out. "Talk tomorrow. Don't worry about me." Her reply was immediate. "Campbell, don't leave. Don't let them win." But they had already won years ago when I started believing their narrative about me. The real loss was that I had ever sought their approval in the first place. I slipped out through a side door, avoiding the main ballroom. The night air felt cleansing after the suffocating atmosphere inside. The valet retrieved my rental car without comment, though I imagined he could sense my humiliation like a visible aura. The drive to my hotel was a blur of streetlights and silence. I didn't allow myself to cry. I was long past tears where my family was concerned. Instead, I felt a cold emptiness, a space where hurt should be, but had been cauterized by years of similar wounds. In my hotel room, I removed the suit that had felt like a costume all night and ordered a whiskey from room service. Sitting in the dark by the window overlooking the city lights of Boston, I wondered what it would have been like to grow up with parents who celebrated my differences instead of trying to correct them, who saw my sensitivity as strength, not weakness, who valued my eye for beauty as much as George's eye for opportunity. My phone buzzed repeatedly, Jessica calling, then texting. Eventually, I turned it off, completely unable to process anyone else's emotions when my own were so raw. Tomorrow would be soon enough to debrief. Tonight, I just needed to be alone with my thoughts, to remind myself that my worth wasn't determined by my family's narrow definition of success. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep, still sitting in the chair by the window, the untouched whiskey warming to room temperature beside me. I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close, and an aching neck from sleeping upright in the hotel chair. My phone, which I'd turned back on before falling asleep, showed 7 missed calls and numerous text notifications. Most were from Jessica, with increasing urgency. "Call me when you get this. Seriously, Campbell, you need to hear what happened. You won't believe the scene your parents caused after you left." The last message had come just an hour ago. "Meeting you for coffee at 9 at the hotel restaurant. No arguments." A glance at the clock showed it was already 8:40. I showered quickly, trying to wash away both the physical and emotional residue of the previous night. Dressed in jeans and a simple button-down, clothes that felt like me, not the performance of who my family wanted me to be, I headed downstairs. Jessica was already waiting 2 coffee cups in front of her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup, a stark contrast to her polished appearance the night before. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Good morning to you too," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. She pushed a coffee toward me. "Black, 2 sugars, still your preference?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. "Thanks." "You should have stayed last night," she said without preamble. "It got interesting after you left." If by interesting you mean more family members taking turns pointing out my inadequacies, I'm glad I missed it. Jessica leaned forward, her expression serious. "That's just it. That's not what happened at all." She took a sip of her coffee, seemingly gathering her thoughts. "After you left, Amanda, sweet proper surgeon Amanda, completely lost it. This was not what I expected." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she stood up, clinked her glass to get everyone's attention, and proceeded to call out your Aunt Melanie and your parents for their treatment of you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "She did what?" "Oh yes. Apparently she's been looking at your work online for months. She told the entire room that your photography was profoundly moving, and that any family should be proud to have an artist of your caliber in their midst." I set down my cup, trying to process this information. She doesn't even know me. Doesn't matter. She knows talent when she sees it, and she knows bullying too, apparently. She said, and I'm quoting, "As best I can remember, I find it appalling that you would humiliate Campbell publicly at what should be a celebration of love and family." "What did my parents say?" Jessica smiled grimly. "Your mother tried to play it off as a joke, said Melanie was just teasing and that you've always been too sensitive. That's when George stepped in." "George?" This was getting harder to believe. "What did he do?" "He stood up next to Amanda and said he agreed with every word she said, that he's watched for years as our family undermined and dismissed your choices, and that he wouldn't have his brother disrespected at his engagement party." I stared at her, searching for signs she was exaggerating. Finding none, I asked, "How did my parents react?" "Not well. Your father accused George of making a scene and suggested they discuss family matters privately. That's when Aunt Melanie made her fatal error." "Which was?" "She said something about how George shouldn't ruin his special night defending someone who clearly doesn't care enough about family to pursue a respectable career or even maintain regular contact." Jessica paused for dramatic effect, clearly enjoying being the bearer of this unexpected news. And I prompted, "And that's when Amanda's father, remember Chief of Surgery, very dignified man, stood up and said that in his experience, people who create art that connects with others, the way your work does, are contributing more to humanity than many respectable professions." Then he asked if anyone had actually looked at your documentary series on rural healthcare access. My documentary series, the one I'd spent 2 years working on, traveling through Appalachian communities documenting the healthcare crisis there. The project that had drained my savings but resulted in work I was genuinely proud of. Work my family had never acknowledged. This is hard to believe, I said finally. It gets better. Your mother tried to change the subject, but George wouldn't let it go. He said he's always admired your courage to pursue what you love, despite the family pressure. That he sometimes wishes he'd had your strength to chart his own course. He said that, about me. Jessica nodded, reaching for her phone. People were posting about it on social media afterward. Look. She showed me a few vague posts from mutual acquaintances, referencing unexpected drama and family revelations at the engagement party. One cousin had written, "Never seen Richard speechless before." Quite refreshing, actually. Anyway, Jessica continued the whole thing basically imploded after that. Half the guests were uncomfortable, the other half were fascinated. Your parents tried to regain control, but the damage was done. The party broke up early with various factions taking sides. And George, is he okay? I wouldn't want this to ruin things for him and Amanda. Jessica's expression softened. That's so you, Campbell. Always worrying about others even when you're the one who's been hurt. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. George is fine. In fact, he's been trying to reach you. He and Amanda both want to talk to you before you head back to New York. I pulled my hand away, uncomfortable with the idea. I don't know, Jess. What's there to say? Thanks for defending my honor. Sorry it ruined your party. It's more than that, I think. I think George has things he needs to tell you. Things that have been unsaid for too long. Like what? Not my place to say. But I think you should give him a chance. I stared into my coffee, conflicted. Part of me wanted to get on the next train back to New York to retreat to the safety of my own world, where my value wasn't constantly questioned. But another part, the part that had agreed to attend the party in the first place, wondered what George might have to say. He's your brother Campbell, Jessica said quietly. And maybe it's time to break the pattern. Isn't that what you do in your work? Show the truth behind the facades. She was right. My photography had always been about revealing the reality beneath surface appearances, finding beauty in overlooked places, dignity in struggling communities, humanity in forgotten faces. Perhaps it was time to apply that same revealing light to my own family situation. Fine, I conceded. I'll meet with him before I leave. Good. Jessica sat back, looking satisfied. He suggested that coffee shop on Newbury Street. The one you two used to go to as teenagers. 4 o'clock. You already arranged it, before I agreed. She shrugged, unapologetic. I know you, Campbell. Beneath all that artistic brooding is a person who still cares about connections, even the painful ones. I couldn't argue with that assessment. For all my attempts to distance myself from my family, I had never quite cut the cord completely. Perhaps it was time to understand why. The Thinking Cup on Newbury Street hadn't changed much in the years since George and I used to come here as teenagers. It had been our neutral territory then, a place equidistant between my photography club meetings and his debate team practice. We'd meet here on rare Wednesday afternoons when our schedules aligned, drinking coffee that felt sophisticated to our teenage palates, pretending to be adults with our own lives and choices. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered some privacy. The familiar aroma of freshly ground beans and the soft hum of conversation brought back memories of a time when George and I were still allies rather than comparative measuring sticks for our parents' approval. At precisely 4 o'clock, George walked in. Unlike last night, he wasn't wearing a designer suit, but casual clothes, similar to mine. Jeans and a simple navy sweater. He scanned the room, his expression uncertain until he spotted me. Something about his vulnerability in that moment caught me off guard. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Thanks for coming. Jessica can be pretty persuasive, I replied, not quite ready to admit I'd wanted to come. An awkward silence stretched between us. George broke it first. About last night. You don't need to explain, I interrupted. Jessica filled me in on the highlights. No, I do need to explain. Not just about last night. He ran a hand through his hair. A nervous gesture I remembered from our childhood. I need to explain about the last 20 years. I raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious for one coffee meeting. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Always the quick comeback. I've missed that, you know. The sincerity in his voice surprised me. Have you? Yes, Campbell. I've missed a lot about you. He sighed deeply. Look, I know what you think. That I enjoyed being the golden child. That I soaked up all the attention and approval while you got whatever was left over. Which wasn't much. That's not what I think, I said automatically, then paused. Okay, maybe it is what I think sometimes. But I don't blame you for it. Mom and Dad made their choices about who and what to value. That's just it. I never wanted to be valued for the things they valued me for. His voice dropped lower, as if confessing something shameful. Do you know why I went into law? Because Dad expected it, I answered immediately. Yes. And because I was terrified of disappointing him, of ending up. He trailed off. Like me, I finished for him. I was going to say alone. Like you seemed after you left. He met my eyes directly. Campbell, I've always admired your courage. You pursued what you loved, despite knowing it would cost you their approval. This was so opposite to what I'd always assumed that I couldn't formulate a response. I wanted to go into environmental science, George continued. I was fascinated by ecology sustainability, but when I mentioned it to Dad as a possible college major, he laughed, actually laughed, said there was no future in tree hugging, and reminded me that the family had connections at all the top law schools. I never knew that, I said quietly. How could you? We stopped really talking by then, but while you were learning photography in New York, I was memorizing case law and hating every minute of it. But you're good at it, I pointed out. You made partner so young. I'm good at pleasing people, at meeting expectations. Not the same thing as passion. He took a sip of his coffee. When I saw your website, your real work, not the commercial stuff, I felt. He struggled for the word. Envious. Not of the success or recognition, but of the freedom, the authenticity. My real work barely pays the bills, George. But it means something. To you and to others. He leaned forward. Amanda found your website months ago when we got engaged. She was researching the family she was marrying into. She showed me your Appalachian Healthcare series, and His voice caught. I was so proud to say you were my brother. The admission hung between us, reshaping the narrative I'd constructed about our relationship. The truth is, George continued, I've been trapped by parents' expectations in ways you escaped. Every choice I've made, law school, the firm, even where we're looking to buy a house, has been to maintain their approval. But you have their approval, I said, still confused. You always have. Conditional approval, he corrected. Based on continuing to be who they want me to be. One wrong move, he snapped his fingers, and I become you in their eyes. The bluntness of this statement should have hurt, but instead it clarified so much. So last night, when you defended me, I finally said what I've wanted to say for years. His expression was both troubled and relieved, though I have to give Amanda credit for the courage to start it. Jessica mentioned Amanda's been looking at my work. Why? She's interested in healthcare advocacy. Your documentary about rural healthcare access resonated with her. She couldn't understand why our parents never mentioned having a son doing such important work. Important, I echoed. The word felt foreign applied to my photography. Campbell, did you know that series was featured in several medical school curriculums? Amanda's colleague uses it to teach about healthcare disparities. I hadn't known that. My work had received some critical acclaim in photography circles, but I had no idea it had reached medical education. The irony is, George continued, your work that our parents dismiss has probably had more real-world impact than half my legal cases combined. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opening a browser to show me something. This article in the Journal of Medical Education referenced your photograph specifically, and this healthcare policy group cited your documentation as influential in their rural outreach program development. I stared at the screen, genuinely shocked. In my struggle to make ends meet, I'd lost track of how my work was being received in worlds outside my own. Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? I asked. George put his phone away, looking ashamed. Because I was a coward. Because acknowledging your success meant confronting my own compromises. He took a deep breath. And because our parents' disapproval is contagious, they've always been so dismissive of your choices that it became the family narrative. A narrative you participated in, I noted, not accusingly but factually. Yes, he admitted. By staying silent when they criticized you. By accepting their framing of your life as somehow less valuable than mine. He looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Campbell. Truly sorry. The apology, so straightforward and unqualified, caught me off guard. In our family, apologies were rare, and usually came with conditions or explanations that minimized responsibility. There's something else you should know, George said after a moment. About Dad. What about him? Did you know he wanted to be a writer? Before law school? This was so unexpected I almost laughed. Dad, a writer? No way. It's true. Grandpa told me once after too much scotch at a holiday dinner. Dad was an English major initially. Wrote poetry, apparently. Had some published in literary journals. I tried to reconcile this information with the pragmatic, numbers-oriented father I knew. What happened? Grandpa happened. Told Dad there was no future in writing and cut off financial support until he switched to pre-law. George's expression was grim. Sound familiar? The parallels were undeniable. So when I chose photography, you became Dad's worst fear, that he'd raised a son who would make the same mistake he was prevented from making. George shook his head sadly. He doesn't see the courage in your choice, because he couldn't find it in himself. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing this revelation. Finally, I asked the question that had been hovering since I arrived. Why tell me all this now, George? Because I'm tired of the patterns we're all trapped in. Because Amanda refuses to join a family that treats people the way you've been treated. And because he hesitated, then pushed forward. Because I want my brother back. I want you to be my best man. The request hung in the air between us. It was the last thing I'd expected when agreeing to this meeting. George, I don't know if that's a good idea. Last night made it pretty clear where I stand in the family hierarchy. That's exactly why it needs to be you. To show that I'm making my own choices now. That Amanda and I are creating our own family culture, not replicating the old one. His expression was earnest. I know it's a lot to ask after everything. But I'm asking anyway. I studied my brother's face. So similar to mine in features, but usually so different in expression. Today I saw something new there. Vulnerability, hope, and a genuine desire for connection. Let me think about it, I said, finally. He nodded, accepting this non-answer with unexpected grace. Fair enough. He reached across the table not to shake hands, but to grip my forearm the way we used to as kids making a pact. Whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm proud to be your brother Campbell. Always have been. As we parted ways outside the coffee shop, I felt lighter somehow. As if a weight I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there had shifted slightly. Not disappeared, but changed position enough to let me stand a little straighter. Walking back toward my hotel, I made an impulsive decision. Instead of returning to New York the next morning as planned, I would make one more stop before leaving Boston. The following afternoon, I stood on the familiar brick pathway leading to my parents' home in Beacon Hill. The 3-story brownstone looked exactly as it always had. Impeccably maintained with perfectly trimmed boxwoods, flanking the entrance and tasteful window boxes displaying seasonal flowers. This had never felt like home to me, even when I lived here. It was always a showcase designed to impress, rather than comfort. I hesitated before ringing the bell, second-guessing my decision to come. After yesterday's conversation with George, I'd spent a restless night contemplating everything he'd revealed. The realization that my father had once harbored artistic ambitions himself had shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our relationship. Not enough to erase years of hurt, but enough to make me curious about what else might lie beneath the polished surface of our family narrative. Before I could reconsider, I pressed the doorbell. My mother answered her surprise, evident in the slight widening of her eyes before her social mask slipped back into place. Campbell. This is unexpected. I know. May I come in? She stepped back, gesturing me inside with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to hosting. Of course. Your father is in his study. I'll let him know you're here. The foyer was unchanged. The same antique console table, the same tasteful artwork, the same feeling of entering a museum rather than a home. I followed my mother to the formal living room, declining her offer of tea or coffee. Minutes later, my father appeared, his expression guarded. Campbell, we thought you'd return to New York. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said, but I wanted to talk to you both first. My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret. They sat across from me, my father in his usual leather armchair, my mother perched on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to rise at any moment to attend to some hostess duty. If this is about what happened at the engagement party, my mother began. Melanie was out of line. She'd had too much champagne, and you know how she gets. This isn't just about Aunt Melanie, I said calmly. It's about the last 35 years. The directness of this statement clearly caught them off guard. My father shifted uncomfortably, a rare display of uncertainty from a man who made his living projecting confidence. That sounds rather dramatic, he said dismissively. Maybe I conceded, but I think we're overdue for some honesty, don't you? Neither responded, so I continued, forcing myself to maintain eye contact despite the discomfort. All my life, I felt like a disappointment to you both, like I was measured against some ideal and consistently found wanting. I've spent years trying to earn your approval, and when that seemed impossible, I tried to convince myself I didn't need it. I took a deep breath. But the truth is, it's hurt. Every comparison to George, every dismissal of my work as a hobby, every time you've introduced me to friends with that slight tone of apology in your voices. We've always supported you, my mother protested weakly. No, you've tolerated me, I corrected. There's a difference. What exactly do you want from us, Campbell? My father asked, his tone somewhere between defensive and genuinely puzzled. Instead of answering immediately, I reached into my messenger bag and pulled out a portfolio I'd brought with me. I opened it on the coffee table between us. This is some of my work, I said, laying out several large prints from various projects. Not the commercial jobs I take to pay bills, but the work that matters to me. I'd like you to actually look at it. Really look. My mother glanced at my father uncertainly, before leaning forward to examine the photographs. He hesitated longer but eventually joined her. I watched their faces as they viewed images from my Appalachian Healthcare series. An elderly woman sitting on her porch miles from the nearest doctor, a volunteer medical clinic set up in a rural school gymnasium, a young mother holding her child while waiting for hours to see a traveling dentist. There were also prints from my series on urban isolation, capturing moments of both loneliness and connection in New York City. This one received a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, I said, pointing to one particular photograph. And this series was acquired by the Museum of Modern Art for their permanent collection. My father's head snapped up at this. The MoMA. You never mentioned that. You never asked, I said simply. You've never asked about my work beyond whether it's paying the bills. A heavy silence fell. My mother touched one of the photographs gently, almost reverently. These are quite powerful, Campbell, she said quietly. I had no idea. I know you didn't. That's the problem. My father cleared his throat, visibly struggling with something. Finally, he asked, how did you know what to capture? How to make people feel something when they look at these? The genuine curiosity in his question surprised me. I look for moments of truth, when people let their guards down, when they're most authentically themselves. He nodded slowly, still studying the images. Something in his expression had changed, softened somehow. Dad, I said, using the familiar term I'd avoided for years, George told me you wanted to be a writer, before law school. His head jerked up, eyes widening in genuine shock. He had no right to. He had every right, I interrupted. We're family, supposedly. My father's jaw tightened, but instead of the anger I expected, something else crossed his face. A fleeting sadness quickly suppressed. That was a very long time ago, he said stiffly. But it happened. You had a passion for something creative, and you were forced to abandon it. I leaned forward. Is that why you've been so hard on me? Because I chose the path you couldn't take. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then to my astonishment, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. You have no idea what it's like, he said, his voice rough with emotion, to watch your son choose a path that you know, leads to struggle and disappointment. How could you know that I challenged? You never took that path yourself. Exactly. The word exploded from him. I was spared that uncertainty, that instability. My father did what was necessary to ensure I had a secure future. And were you happy? I asked quietly. He looked away. Happiness is a luxury, Campbell. Security, respect, providing for your family. These are what matter. They matter, I agreed. But they're not the only things that matter. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. We worried about you, Campbell. We still do. The arts are so uncertain. We've seen so many talented people struggle, end up bitter and broke. And you thought criticism and withdrawal would somehow prevent that, I asked, not unkindly. We thought. She hesitated. We thought you'd eventually see reason. Choose something more practical. Like George did, I noted. Yes, she acknowledged. Though after the other night, I wonder if we were wrong about that too. This admission, that they might have been wrong about something so fundamental, felt momentous. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my parents not as the infallible authorities of my childhood, but as flawed, complex people with their own fears and regrets. I don't expect you to suddenly understand or approve of my choices, I said carefully. But I do want you to see me, really see me, for who I am, not who you wished I would be. My father stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the garden. For a long moment he said nothing. When he turned back, his expression was different, less guarded, more genuine than I'd seen in years. Your photographs, he said haltingly. They have a perspective I hadn't considered, a way of seeing beyond the surface. He gestured vaguely at the prints still laid out on the table. Perhaps I could see more of your work sometime. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a direct acknowledgement of all that had been said. But from my father, this tentative expression of interest represented a seismic shift. My mother rose and moved to stand beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. We have that empty wall in the dining room, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Perhaps one of Campbell's pieces would look nice there. I almost laughed at the understatement. The suggestion that my work might look nice as decor, rather than being valued for its artistic merit. But I recognized the gesture for what it was, a small step across a vast divide. I'll send you some options to consider, I said, matching her neutral tone while meeting my father's eyes. As I gathered my portfolio to leave, my father cleared his throat again. George mentioned you might be, that he's asked you to be his best man. He did ask, I confirmed. And will you, my mother inquired, trying and failing to sound merely curious. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly. It depends on a lot of things. Such as my father pressed. Such as whether I believe we can all be in the same room without repeating the patterns of the past. I stood with my bag packed, ready to leave. Such as whether I believe this conversation today will lead to real change, or if it's just another moment that will be conveniently forgotten. My directness clearly made them uncomfortable, but neither objected to the challenge implicit in my words. As I reached the front door, my mother surprised me by touching my arm. Campbell, she said hesitantly, thank you for coming today, for showing us your work. I'm sorry we haven't seen it before. It wasn't everything I might have hoped for, but it was perhaps everything I could realistically expect from this first real conversation. Not a complete transformation, but a crack in the facade that had separated us for so long. A possibility. I'll be in touch about George's wedding, I said, stepping out onto the brick pathway, and about those photographs for your dining room wall. As I walked away from my childhood home, I felt neither the crushing disappointment nor the vindication I might have anticipated. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. The possibility that relationships like photographs can be reframed, slowly, carefully, one perspective at a time. 6 months later, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Boston Public Library, adjusting my bow tie in a gilt-edged mirror. The historic space had been transformed for George and Amanda's wedding, with cascading white orchids and soft lighting that highlighted the arched ceilings and ornate details of the century-old architecture. "Need help with that?" George appeared beside me in the mirror, already perfectly put together in his tuxedo. "I've got it," I assured him, finally getting the tie straight. "Though I'm still not sure how you talked me into wearing this monkey suit. The same way Amanda talked me into this venue instead of the country club Mom and Dad wanted. Persistence and puppy dog eyes." He grinned, then grew more serious. "Thank you, Campbell, for being here, for saying yes." I turned to face my brother directly. "Thanks for asking, and for everything else." The everything else encompassed months of cautious rebuilding, weekly phone calls that grew increasingly comfortable, a few tense but productive family dinners, and George's unwavering insistence that I be treated as an equal in all. Wedding preparations. There had been setbacks, of course. My mother still occasionally made comments about my unusual career, and my father sometimes lapsed into his old patronizing tone. But there had also been genuine moments of connection. My father asking thoughtful questions about my latest project. My mother proudly showing a visiting friend the photograph now hanging prominently in their dining room. "How are you feeling?" I asked George. "Ready for the big moment?" "Surprisingly calm," he replied. "When something's right, you just know it." I nodded, understanding he wasn't just talking about Amanda. George had made other significant changes in the past months, including stepping away from corporate law to join a non-profit environmental legal defense fund, a move that had initially shocked our parents, but ultimately earned their reluctant respect. A knock at the door signaled it was time. As best man, I'd be walking down the aisle with Amanda's sister Rachel, who had become more than just a wedding party connection over the intervening months. Our shared experience as family outsiders had evolved into a deeper understanding and eventually a relationship that neither of us had expected but both welcomed. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. Amanda radiant in her elegant gown, George looking at her with undisguised adoration, their personally written vows bringing tears to even the most stoic guests. I found myself watching my parents' reactions throughout the ceremony. They sat in the front row, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders, both of them beaming with pride. What surprised me was that when I caught my father's eye, as I stood beside George, his proud smile included me too. At the reception, I took my place at the microphone for the best man's toast. The room quieted as I surveyed the gathered faces, family members who had witnessed my humiliation at the engagement party now watching expectantly to see what I would say. For those who don't know me, I'm Campbell, George's older brother. I began making eye contact with various guests. Growing up, George and I were very different people with very different paths. For a long time, those differences seemed to define our relationship, or lack thereof. I paused, finding Rachel's encouraging smile in the crowd, then continuing with renewed confidence. But what I've learned over these past months is that differences don't have to divide us. They can complement each other, offering perspective we might otherwise miss. I turned toward George and Amanda. George has always had the ability to see the best in people, to believe in possibilities others might dismiss. It's what makes him an incredible brother, and what will make him an amazing husband. I raised my champagne glass higher. To George and Amanda, may your life together be built on mutual respect, genuine understanding, and the courage to follow your shared vision, even when the path isn't easy or conventional. To George and Amanda, the crowd echoed glasses clinking throughout the room. As I returned to my seat, my father caught my arm briefly. "Well said, son," he murmured, the simple compliment meaning more than any elaborate praise might have. Later, as the reception was in full swing, I found a quiet moment to slip away to the library's balcony for some fresh air. I was surprised when my mother joined me there, her silver dress catching the moonlight. "It was a beautiful ceremony," she said, standing beside me at the stone railing. "Yes, it was," I agreed. "George and Amanda seemed truly happy." She nodded, then added unexpectedly, "Your father and I saw your new exhibition at the Kendall Gallery last week." This surprised me. I'd mentioned the exhibition casually during our last family dinner, but hadn't explicitly invited them, unsure whether they'd be interested. "What did you think?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. It was illuminating. She chose her words carefully. "Seeing your work in that context, surrounded by people who clearly value what you do, it helped me understand." "Understand what?" "Why you've fought so hard to follow your own path." She turned to face me directly. "I still worry about you, Campbell. I suspect I always will. But I'm beginning to see that there are different kinds of success, different ways to build a meaningful life." Coming from my mother, this acknowledgement was monumental. Before I could respond, Rachel appeared in the doorway. "There you are," she said, smiling at us both. "They're about to cut the cake." My mother patted my arm gently. "We should go back inside. Your date is looking for you." The slight emphasis on date and the approving glance she gave Rachel suggested another small step forward. As the evening wound down, I found myself observing the room through the eyes of the photographer. I was noticing moments others might miss. My father laughing genuinely with Amanda's father over shared stories. George dancing with our grandmother with tender care. Rachel chatting animatedly with my cousin Jessica, both of them glancing my way occasionally with conspiratorial smiles. And when the time came for the final toast of the evening, I was surprised when both my parents rose, glasses in hand. "We want to thank everyone for sharing this special day," my father began. "Seeing George and Amanda begin their journey together fills us with joy and hope for their future." My mother continued seamlessly. "And we want to thank both of our sons, George, for his steadfast heart, and Campbell for his perceptive eye. We are fortunate and proud to be your parents." Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment of connection, I felt something shift inside me. Not a complete healing of old wounds, but a genuine beginning. The acknowledgement was simple but profound: both of our sons. Not the successful one and the disappointment, just both of their sons. The journey to this moment had been long and often painful. There were still uncomfortable silences, misunderstandings, and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there was also something new emerging, a family dynamic based on acceptance rather than expectations, appreciation rather than comparison. I had learned that confronting painful family dynamics takes tremendous courage, but avoiding them only prolongs the suffering. That people can change when given the opportunity, even those we've written off as permanently fixed in their ways. That success comes in many forms, often in ways we least expect. That creating connections with chosen family, like Rachel, like Amanda, can heal wounds inflicted by biological ones. And perhaps most importantly, that finding peace comes not from external validation but from self-acceptance. The scars would always remain, markers of old injuries that had shaped who I'd become. But scars also represent healing, the body's remarkable ability to repair itself after trauma. Perhaps families could do the same, not erasing past hurts, but growing around them, incorporating them into a newer, stronger whole. As the wedding reception drew to a close, I found myself standing between my parents as we waved goodbye to George and Amanda departing for their honeymoon. My father's hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a simple gesture that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "So, what about your family relationships? Have you experienced the pain of being the different one, the courage of confronting old patterns, or the tentative hope of rebuilding what was broken? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that healing isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But every authentic connection is worth the effort. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family reconciliation and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the deepest wounds can become our greatest teachers if we have the courage to learn from them.